So I'm very thrilled to have today's guest with us today. I'd like to introduce her. We have Mrs. Sally Matson with us today. Sally graduated from Northwestern University, where she studied acting and directing. Following graduation, she performed for a Department of Defense show in the Pacific, then moved from state to state with her husband. She wrote and hosted programs for Connecticut cable television and has been acting for 40 years. Mrs. Matson now combines her love of research, writing, and acting to bring fearless historical women to life. Margaret Bourke-White is her latest effort. Bourke-White was born in 1904. She strode brazenly into a field dominated by men, industrial photography. In 1936, she was named one of the 10 most influential women in America. Bourke-White stopped taking photographs in the 1950s, but she would like to share some of her adventures with you. So please welcome Margaret Bourke-White.
Thank you. Well, how delightful that so many of you are interested in my story. And here it is, the 50s. All the ladies are in dresses and heels. And I'm in pants, you know. I think you know I had to wear pants in my career, climbing on scaffoldings, going into war zones. But I should explain I am dismantling my studio. I am no longer using my typewriters or my cameras, but I did save out this one speed graphic, my old comforting standby when all other mechanisms failed. You know, you had to have backup. I would have 2 cameras around my neck. I'd have 50, 100, 200 of these bubble flash bulbs. Something always went wrong. But let me ask you to step back in time so I can explain how I became this photojournalist. Well, I used to love going on nature walks with my father in Bound Brook, New Jersey. We would find snakes and turtles. I'd put them under the dining room table. Sometimes I'd go into school with a snake around my neck. I craved attention. My father was an engineer. He was refining multicolor printing. He was a perfectionist. Sometimes I'd watch him developing or rinsing out photos in the bathtub. And one time, he took me to a foundry. And I know that is when my love of machines began. There were machine parts being made out of molten steel. And there was this sudden magic of flowing metal, flying sparks, heat and energy and power. I loved that. His philosophy was never finish a job until you have done it to suit yourself and better than anyone else requires you to do it. My mother's mantra was, reject the easy path, do it the hard way. So with those messages burned in my brain, I began Columbia University 1921. But that January, my father died suddenly. I was able to finish the semester. In fact, I took a photography course from the famous Clarence H. White and concentrated on composition and design. But then you see, I had to make money to continue my education, so I had already lined up a summer job as nature counselor and photography counselor at a camp, and my mother gave me a used Ica reflex camera with a cracked lens. But actually, it didn't matter because in the early 20s, people wanted their photographs to look like paintings, sort of hazy. So I set up my own little shop at the camp. I sold photographs to the town shops, to the parents, to the staff. And then I'm going to skip the next few years. It's too complicated. I went to a number of colleges, but I spent my last 2 years at Cornell University, where I was photographing those gorgeous stone buildings and through the library tower down to the lake. And the professors thought that I should be an architectural photographer. Well, I hadn't thought of that. So upon graduation, I moved to Cleveland. Some of my family was there, and that industrial city just spoke to me. There was Lake Erie and the Cuyahoga River running through. There was the terminal tower going up and the high-level bridge. I spent hours experimenting with abstract patterns and repeating patterns and black and light and shadow. Because pictorialism was out now in the later 20s, modernism was in. I met a man named Alfred Bemis. He was a clerk in a photography store. He admired my talent, and I admired his technical ability. Soon I had jobs at the Chamber of Commerce, at Union Trust Bank, but I wanted to get into Otis Steel. Every night I went past that factory. I wrangled my way into an interview with Mr. Coulis at Otis Steel. Well, I believe there is a power and vitality in industry that makes it a magnificent subject for photography. And your steel mills are the very heart of the industry with the most beauty, the most drama. Well, it will just be experimentation for now. No, I won't faint. I am not the fainting kind. Well, Mr. Coulis said yes. I could go into his factory anytime, and then he went off to Europe for 5 months, which was perfect. Beam and I went into that factory night after night after night. We'd have the snow at our backs and this blistering heat at our fronts, blistering the wood off my camera. I was trying to capture the 200-ton ladle pouring out the molten steel. But all of the sparks, the light, the fire, it was all black. And then miraculously, this friend of Beam's on his way to Hollywood with flares stopped in. And when I used those flares, the white light provided the clarity. Let me show you what I was able to accomplish. First, the molten steel. And then, the 200-ton ladle. And this photograph won me first prize at the Cleveland Museum of Art. Well, when Mr. Coulis returned, he offered me $100 a print, almost 5 times what I had been getting, and he wanted more. I wrote in my journal at the time, I want to do all the things that women never do. I want to become famous, and I want to become wealthy. My jobs have increased. I've been hired by an architectural firm. Chrysler and Republic Steel are interested in my work for advertising. I've opened my own studio in the Terminal Tower, and I've changed my name from Peggy White, my father's last name, to Margaret Bourke, my mother's maiden name, Bourke-White. Has more gravitas, don't you think? And then I received a telegram. Have just seen your steel photographs. Can you come to New York within a week at our expense? Henry R. Luce, Time magazine. Huh. Well, I wasn't interested in photographing political personages. There were all these ore boats and trestles and trains and factories waiting. But I suppose a few days in New York would be all right, so I was interviewed by Mr. Luce in his rapid-fire delivery. Who are you? What are you? Why are you taking these steel photographs? I explained it was my profession, and a very serious one. What they were going to do was launch Fortune magazine, which would combine business and industry, and words and photographs would be partners. It would be everything from the steam shovel to the board of directors. And they wanted me to be the first photographer on staff. Well, I agreed to their contract, but not until they gave me half of the year off for my advertising work and my commissioned work. I wrote to my mother, "Mother, I feel as if the world has opened up to me and I hold all the keys." And then came the crash. The stock market crashed, but Mr. Luce said, no, we're going ahead with Fortune. So I moved to New York, and one of my first assignments was to photograph the Chrysler Building. going to be the tallest building in the world, and my photographs would prove that. Sometimes I'd be out on the scaffolding, swaying 8 feet in either direction, with 3 men holding my tripod, as I got these shots of New York or the Chrysler Building. And when they said they were going to put gargoyles up on the 61st floor, I said, that is where I will have my studio. And I did. Now, Oscar Grabner took this photograph of me. He was the photo editor at Fortune magazine. And I have to tell you, I was never afraid of heights, never. But then, you know, we needed a backlog of stories for Fortune, so they asked me to go out with the writers. I went with Archibald MacLeish to the Elgin Watch Factory, with Dwight McDonald to Corning Glass Works, and with Mr. Luce to the South Bend, Indiana. We covered the whole backside of South Bend, Indiana. And I have to tell you, of the hundreds of shots I took, I want to show you my favorite. These are plow blades. Do you understand? They're about to be painted red for the farmers. Plow blades. Some people thought they looked like the legs of the Rockettes. Then 1930, I was sent to Germany to photograph their rearmaments, which I did. But I wanted to get into Russia, land of tantalizing mystery. Nobody had been across those borders in years, and they had the 5-year plan going on. Well, Mr. Luce said, no, we're covering Germany, we're not covering Russia. Well, nothing attracts me like a closed door. I cannot let my cameras rest until I have pried it open, and I wanted to be first. I had already applied for a visa, and when I got to the embassy in Berlin, the Russian embassy, the men said, oh, your pictures will be your passport. But no, it was 5.5 weeks. I was waiting, I was out of food, I was out of money. Finally, they realized, yes, this would be great PR for them. So by the time I got into Russia, I was accompanied by a whole cadre of men as we went to I'm going blank. As we went to the largest dam, to the collective farms, to the tractor factory. I had 800 shots ready to send them back to New York. But they had to be developed for the censors. It took me the next 36 hours, the last 6 on my knees, rinsing out these films and hanging them all over my hotel room. Well, I was invited back the next 2 summers. Things were different now. People were tired, they were shabbier. Women were longing for fashionable clothing, for lipstick. Well, I came back and wrote Eyes on Russia, and that became a pattern for me. I would do a major story, then write a book, then go on a lecture tour. But you know, in these early 30s, I was doing a great deal of advertising work for Goodyear Tire, for Buick, for Eastern Airlines. TWA asked me to photograph their planes going across the routes in the United States. So they would put me in a small plane, take off the door, and I would be leaning out with my K20 camera and capturing these mosaic fields and the Grand Canyon. It was glorious. I have to tell you, I had men falling for me left and right, pilots, musicians, writers. But I did try not to get emotionally involved. Oh, in 1933, I sent one of my photographs of the new George Washington Bridge to Amelia Earhart, and she wrote, I have just returned to find your gift of the beautiful span. I think you've caught the spirit of the Washington Bridge subtly and exactly. Thank you for sending it as an example of photographic art, and also as a demonstration of what ability lurks with women. Sincerely yours, Amelia Earhart. Well, then 1934, I was sent to cover the Great Drought in Nebraska. It wasn't called the Dust Bowl until the next year. I had a 5-day deadline, so I hired a 2-seater Curtiss Robin airplane. We discovered it was all the way from the Dakotas to the Texas Panhandle, 16 million acres of overcultivated soil just blowing away. Sometimes there would be just a whole curtain of soil. I wrote for my story in Fortune, "This year there is an atmosphere of utter hopelessness. Nothing to do, no use digging out the chicken coops or the pig pens from the last disaster because the next one is coming along. No trying to keep the house clean. Vitamin K, they called it, the dust that sifts under the doorsill and stings the eyes and grittily seasons every spoonful of food. It gets in the butter and the baby's milk." You know, suddenly it was the people who counted instead of the machinery. Speaking with these farmers in the Dakotas, I began to see everything in a new light, and I thought I should stop some of my advertising work and do more documentary work. And you know, the timing was perfect. Maybe you know Erskine Caldwell. He had written God's Little Acre and Tobacco Road, and people thought he was exaggerating wildly the poverty in the South with the sharecroppers. He wanted someone to document it. So that was me. We met in Augusta, Georgia, and it just took a few days to figure out who was going to be boss. But then it got so, I loved watching Erskine work. He had this quiet, receptive approach. He would wait until the subject revealed his personality, and then he would begin the interview. You know, he was a Southerner.